from the standpoint of the County Human Services administrators, there's more than three things, but there are three key things that we believe we need to improve oversight and care for kids, particularly kids who've experienced significant trauma. The data that Mr. Lightbourne talked about, so that we know a lot more about what children are taking and how it's affecting them. We're co-sponsoring with the National Center for Youth Law SB 238 Mitchell. Mr. Bell is a co-author of that measure.
That's the data bill.
The data bill. So we're armed with information, not just for us, but for court-appointed special advocates and attorneys and caregivers and judges, so we all know more. The second thing we need are more family homes and relative homes. So much of what we've discussed presumes that we have families to take youth in lieu of children being in higher levels of care, more restrictive levels of care. And we have a significant shortage in the state of California. Yeah. Partly that's due to the success of AB 12, which extended foster care to 21. Because more kids are staying in the system with their caregivers, fewer caregivers are then turning over and available. But compared to the number that you cited for how much we spend on psychotropic medications, the state spends about $2 million for foster family home recruitment, retention, and support. The continuum of care reform proposal that the governor put out in the January budget identifies that gap, identifies a need for more resources. We respectfully, to all members here, believe that that investment needs to be significantly higher than even the governor proposes in January. But in order for youth, Ms. Rodriguez was right, in order for youth and caregivers to be able to normalize experiences so kids can be in soccer and debate and cheerleading and music, and in order to recruit high quality families, in order to give them the mentoring and the respite and the training they need, we need more resources. Because all of those reforms in the Venn diagram that Mr. Lightbourne put out, KDA, continuum of care reform, QIP, all of those depend on an adequate supply of high quality family homes. And we would like to work with you on our legislation and our budget proposal, which we believe could help accelerate our efforts forward, knowing that we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you. Please.
Yes, if I may, Chairman McGuire, I'd like to respond to your question about incentives that physicians may have been taken to prescribe psychotropic agents to children. If for a moment I can wear my hat of the Ethics Committee of the California Medical Association and my hat as a member of the Ethics Committee of the American Psychiatric Association, I would strongly state that any physician who takes monetary incentives to provide a certain type of medication is unethical. And I would expand that to say that any provider who takes monetary incentives to provide any service which does not help an individual child, particularly in the foster care system, is equally unethical.
Do you think that, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you about Vermont, but do you believe that there needs to be reform related to the issue of incentives? Because I think whether it is specific financial incentives or extracurricular incentives, those incentives are being offered and frankly taken. So, and we know that. So do you believe that there should be some reform, particularly focused on psych meds for those docs that are prescribing within the foster care system?
I think if there are currently any who are taking incentives, monetary or otherwise, to prescribe psychotropic agents to foster care children, there should certainly be reforms implemented. What those reforms might be, remains to be seen.
No, absolutely. And I think that what the data has shown is those individual physicians that are involved within the foster care system in the state, we do see a higher number of incentives, extracurricular, financial, or otherwise, right, that are being distributed. So that is, and I hear you, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and you may or may not be aware of this, but Congress has taken some steps along this regard, especially in the area of continuing medical education for physicians. I happen to chair the Continuing Medical Education Committee for LA County Department of Mental Health, and as such, we are held to a standard whereby we are essentially precluded now through the AMA and the CMA in having speakers provide education to our psychiatrists who have these conflicts of interest. And then, of course, Los Angeles County, and I believe many other counties, have policies in place to discourage that kind of behavior.
No, thank you so much. I appreciate you going into that. Thank you. Please.
I apologize if you didn't hear my concern earlier regarding the overprescribing, and we share that concern with you and are willing to work with you to make the fixes necessary. I agree with what the panelists have said about some of the things that we are working on and things that we can work on to make improvements, but I was very moved by the first panel and talking about their experiences. And in my first, I've been in this field for 30 years, and my first job was in working in a group home. Oh, really? And I went in totally unprepared, did not have the training. We didn't even, this is many, many years ago, but we didn't even talk about trauma back then. Wow. And so I do think there needs to be education of the professionals regarding trauma-focused treatment. We would like to see there never be any foster care or any child prescribed psychotropic medications. In fact, if I can be so bold, I would love to put Will Lightbourne out of business and have no child removed from their home. But I think in this conversation, we also need to look at why are the children removed from their homes? And are there interventions such as more substance use disorder services that we could provide, which, especially through the waiver that we're working on now, that would help prevent? There's also the Child Welfare Council also has a PASS program, which is giving kids who are up for reunification priority access to services. And so we'd like to see a lot of these efforts be successful so that children are able to maintain those relationships with their parents and to be able to stay home.
Thank you, and I really do appreciate that clarification, and just want to say thank you for your passion as well, because I could tell it's very personal. So thank you so much. Anyone else? Please, Doctor.
Yes, since I have all of you captive,
yeah.
I'd like to make in a plug for supporting families before they become clients of the child welfare system.
Yeah.
And I think if there are investments in that arena, we would go a long way toward not only decreasing the number of children being removed from their home, but the use of psychotropic agents and other kinds of interventions that they wouldn't need.
No, thank you so much, Doctor. Senator Bell, I want to see if there's any follow-up, please.
Just to tell you, one thing I'm doing that's relevant to that and some of the issues I know that you care about. I'm preparing an audit request of the program for behavioral health in the schools. That was taken away from the mental health system a few years ago, and it was done during the budget process. It was done in the Budget Act, and there was no policy hearings or discussion about what that meant to transfer this program from the mental health programs. I think you were a mental health director at the time, right? Yeah. Okay, and so you know what I'm talking about, and you were too. So transferring it from the mental health programs to the schools, okay? But there is now no measurement. We don't know what's going on with these kids, how they're coordinated with the mental health and social service systems, how many of these kids are foster youth. They don't track any of that. So I think there's an element there that needs to be worked on. I request an audit. There's going to be an audit done by the state auditor. If the audit committee which I'm a member of, approves it. Then it will then it will go subsequent to develop with my colleagues in Human Services here some legislation to put the coordination back where it should be. We should have had a policy discussion before we did such a thing that affected, I think it's about 80,000 or 100,000 children that have seriously emotional disturbances. And we should have done something on a policy level before. We should never do these kinds of things in the Budget Act. We should always do them through the policy committees. So I think one of the things about kids is we ought to say nothing about kids unless it goes through a policy committee. I think we ought to agree with that. We should have careful, clear understanding of what we're doing before we go ahead and do these things. So anyway, that's going to be requested. I hope people support that.
Thank you very much for that. We really look forward to that.
I want to say thank you to our panelists, and let's give them a round of applause for their hard work, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're now moving on to our next panel, and that's on local systems of oversight and care. But before we do, I want to remind you that we need to continue to advance this issue, which is why you're going to be seeing a second oversight hearing later this fall focus on this this issue at hand today, along with the Continuum of Care report. And we encourage you to please stay connected on this important issue, as we are not going to allow this to be deferred. Our local systems and oversight and care panel is going to provide a deeper understanding in the local systems of care that may be in place from the perspective of county child welfare, the courts, and foster care providers. We're going to be asking how counties and providers can work together more effectively to ensure that kids on psychotropic medications receive the care they need, and that all foster children receive appropriate services that might prevent the need for those medications. We have a tremendous panel, and we're grateful that everyone is here. We have William Grimm, Senior Attorney from the National Center for Youth Law, Lynn Thal, from the Alliance for Child and Family Services, Brenda Parrish, Public Health Nurse from the County of Alameda. We're grateful. We have Judge Michael Nash, Superior Court from Los Angeles County, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Judge Nash for his amazing advocacy on behalf of juveniles throughout this state and for youth. He's truly a leader, as well as Laureate Medina, Director of the Santa Clara County Department of Family and Children's Services, who's going to be speaking with us as well, and home to Senator Bell. And we do want to say thank you to Majority Leader Monning, who is back from his other meetings, and we're grateful for all of your time, sir. Thank you so much. So let's kick this off with William Grimm, Senior Attorney with the National Center for Youth Law, who will be providing 4 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman McGuire and Bell and Senator Monning. I work at the National Center for Youth Law, where I'm part of a team of lawyers and policy analysts that work to improve the health, education, and safety of foster youth around the country. And I appreciate this opportunity to suggest to you someday some of the steps we can take to protect our children from the inappropriate and unsafe administration of psychotropic medications. When more than 25% of older children and adolescents in our state are medicated with one or more psychotropic medications, and thousands of children are taking multiple types of those medications at the same time, and when 50% of those foster children receiving a psychotropic medication are administered an antipsychotic reserved for the most severe mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia and bipolar, it is clear that the health and welfare of our foster children, as it was in 2006, today in 2015, remains at grave risk. There are many reasons for these unsafe practices. As other speakers before me have noted, the array of mental health services available to foster youth is paltry and inadequate and has been for years. Children in our foster care system move from placement to placement, and consequently, they change both caregivers and prescribers, and oftentimes the next prescriber doesn't know what the first prescriber had given to the child. And prescribers are asked to prescribe medications and conduct complete comprehensive assessments of a child without being provided with the child's medical history, the medication history, or any idea about the traumatic history of that child before he or she came into the foster care system. Group homes, like nursing homes, use drugs to sedate residents because staff are inadequately trained and staff ratios are higher than they should be. I mean, if one looks back at the current ongoing initiative of the Center for Medicare Services about the use of antipsychotics to treat dementia patients in nursing homes, the parallels between that problem and epidemic and the problem in our California group homes should not be missed. All of these factors that I've listed and more contribute to the system's dependence on drugs as a quick fix, the default treatment for too many foster children. With many reasons driving the overprescribing of psychotropic drugs, we need multiple approaches to curtail them and ensure that only those children for whom these powerful drugs are appropriate actually receive them. Our goal here is not to prohibit the use of psychotropic medications in an appropriate medically sound situation, nor is it to prohibit a particular drug, a class of drugs. Rather, it is to ensure that decisions are based on sound medical practice and that decision makers have sufficient information to make informed decisions for our foster children. And for those children given these drugs, we must put in place mechanisms to monitor the child's responses, to determine if the benefits expected are actually realized, and if the adverse effects of the drugs outweigh the benefits, if any. Unfortunately, our current systems of oversight are inadequate and ineffective, and have been so for years. But we can build on some existing mechanisms and programs to improve the health and safety of our foster children. And this will require a number of things. These are sort of our 5 steps in responding to Senator Hancock's ask for 5 things that could be done. 1, support for the juvenile courts. They are the gatekeepers, the decision makers in our current system. 2, as Senator Bell has mentioned and is supporting and authoring a bill, giving our public health nurses a clear role and the resources needed to oversee medications for children in foster care. 3rd, the training of foster parents, relatives, group home staff, dependency attorneys, judges, and others in the use and misuse of psychotropic medications. 4th, the reform of our group homes, and particularly their dependence and reliance upon and over-medication of our children in foster care. And 5th, sharing data across agencies to track individual and systemic red flags. Now, in the short time that I have today, I just want to focus on 2 of those 5 particular steps. 15 years ago, this legislature created the Health Program for Children in Foster Care, in which public health nurses work with caseworkers to ensure that a child's health, mental health, and dental needs are met. This program is one of the strengths of our California foster care system. Public health nurses bring a medical expertise and a focus to the case that allows the caseworker to concentrate on what are the more traditional child welfare areas of safety and permanency. While some public health nurses around the state now oversee psychotropic medications, we propose that they be given explicit statutory authority and the resources needed to conduct this oversight. Professional standards of care provide that certain lab tests and other screenings be completed before children receive many psychotropic medications. Periodic follow-up is also needed to identify adverse effects that may trigger a reconsideration of the drug or drugs. And we believe that public health nurses are in the best suited position to fill this role. And so we wholeheartedly support Senator Bell's push to increase and to strengthen our public health nurse foster care program. Secondly, since 1999, juvenile courts have been the decision makers, the gatekeepers for authorizing psychotropic medications for children in foster care. But we have not given the courts the standards by which to guide their decision-making, nor the support necessary to make informed decisions. Senator Monning, who is the author of SB 253, pointed out recently that this is a human rights issue as well as other kinds of issues arising whenever someone is medicated without their informed consent. 25 years ago, United States Supreme Court Justice Stevens wrote, "The liberty of our citizens to resist the administration of mind-altering drugs arises from our nation's most basic values. The dimensions of this liberty are both physical and intellectual. Every violation of a person's bodily integrity is an invasion of his or her liberty. When the purpose or effect of drugging is to alter the will and the mind of the subject, it constitutes a deprivation of liberty in the most literal and fundamental sense." Today, California law upholds the rights of convicted felons confined to our state prisons and county jails, sexually violent predators, and those adjudicated not guilty by reason of an insanity to refuse the administration of antipsychotic medications unless specific circumstances exist and due process is afforded them. Among other protections, they are entitled to counsel, to be present at the hearing, and to have decisions about medication made on clear and convincing evidence. Certainly, we can and must afford our foster children even greater protections against the misuses of these medications. Thank you.